Resawing is a really important part of woodworking. One, it helps you conserve lumber by only using a part of a board that you need, but two, it's great for creating grain match so that when you create boxes, it looks like you have continuous grain all the way around your board. Today, I'm going to show you 4 ways to resaw a board that I think will really improve your woodworking, because if you don't have like a really big bandsaw, there's a lot of other ways to do it. Another great little trick is when you're resawing, sometimes you release moisture on the inside of the board that is more than the outside of the board, has a tendency to cup a little bit overnight. You can take a wet rag and wipe the outsides of the board, so the area on the outside of where you resawed it, clamp it up in a vise, let it dry overnight. Sometimes that can bring it back. So a good little tip to save cup boards if you don't have a jointer. So let's head over to the table saw and do number 1. So the first way we're gonna do it is on the table saw. Now this is definitely more of an expert level way to do it, but one thing that's gonna be really important is you put a good ripping blade in. These deep gullets are gonna be really important for clearing out sawdust. Why don't you come into the table and let me show you the setup. All right, so we're gonna start, like I said, with our ripping blade, and then we've got our board, a feather board, and now if your board is more than twice the height of your fence, you're gonna wanna get an auxiliary fence like this that just flips over, and that's gonna give you some extra support. Looks very much like a bandsaw fence. You're gonna start by finding center on your board. Now this is super easy. You don't even need to measure. This is what I like to do, is we just get kind of close to the center, and then you make a mark here, and then all you have to do is measure on the other side of your board, and then right in between that is going to be your center line. Really simple, doesn't take any measuring at all, and what's great is you just kind of split the difference, because usually when you're resawing, you're going to end up going back to the planer anyways. Like I said in the intro, you're going to get some cupping, you're going to have to remill your boards anyway. So let's take it in here and let me show you the setup on the blade. All right, so this is very simple to do. You just need to remember that you always keep the same side against your fence. We're gonna go ahead and find center of our board, lock our fence down. We're gonna bring our feather board in, pushing it up against the fence. You're gonna use 2 push sticks, one to push it into the fence and one on the top of the board. You wanna make sure your push stick has a heel on it that's covering both sides of the cut. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna make several passes. So I've marked this out here. I've done 1 inch because I have a 5 horsepower saw, but if you have like a 1 1/4 horse job site saw, you're gonna wanna do less than 1 inch, maybe ½ inch at a time. You don't wanna push your saw because the blade is buried in the board. So you really wanna be using something with really big gullets and going slow. So we're gonna go to 1 inch, make a cut, flip it over, 1 inch. Then we're gonna raise that up to the 2 inch mark here. We're gonna make a pass, flip it over, ensuring we're holding it against the fence. And then here's where you have a choice. You can see my 3, this is a 5½ inch board. My blade will go to 3 1/4, so I could easily cut through this, but that can be kind of dangerous when it splits apart. So what I like to do is just leave a little tiny line, and you can check that when you're raising your blade height, because you'll see at the end here, we're gonna have 2 kerfs that have a little gap in between. So you don't wanna raise the blade above the gap when you're cutting, and then you'll be able to just snap your board apart, run it through the planer, and get it nice and square again. So let's go ahead and make this cut, and I'll show you how it's done. So you can see I just have a little sliver left. That's probably expert mode. I would leave a little bit more than that, but just check this out. You can just snap it right off, just like that. And then you can just hand plane that off with a hand plane or run it through the planer. We've got 2 perfectly resawn boards here. So let's head over to the bandsaw. I'll show you how I do it there. And then we'll get into this really cool way that the Japanese do it by hand. Now the bandsaw is the most common way to resaw a board, but a lot of times people don't have room for a big bandsaw like this with a lot of resaw capacity, which is why, we can do it on the table saw. One of the great things about the table saw method is you can actually get it started. If you have a low powered bandsaw, you can get it started on the table saw where you do just a couple passes, then come over here and it's really easy to follow that line and set it up for center. There's 2 ways to do it on the bandsaw. Now, again, the bandsaw, there's a lot that goes into tuning up a bandsaw, and I have a whole video on how to tune up a bandsaw so that you get really nice straight cuts. I'm gonna link that in the top right, your top right-hand corner here. But for this portion, we're just gonna talk about how to actually resaw. Now there's two ways to do this. You can do it freehand. Some people, if you've got a nice thick piece of wood like this 8/4 stock here, sometimes people will do it by hand and sort of just follow the line because you know you're going to go to the planer anyways. A bandsaw does not leave a smooth cut. The other one is with a resaw fence. A lot of bandsaws come with a resaw fence like this one here, and that's going to give you a nice flat reference area. But just like the table saw, you're going to want to use a feather board. So let's come in here and let's talk about different kind of blades and how to set this up. Now, just like on the table saw, your blade matters. Now, here's my resaw blade here, which is a 3/4 inch 3 TPI blade. Here's some other blades. This is maybe one you could get away with if you have a pretty powerful bandsaw, you go really slow, but you got to remember you have to remove all that sawdust, and that's what builds up in these gullets here. So this is a 1/4 inch 6 TPI blade. You can see the difference. There's many more teeth. It's thinner. This is going to be more for like general template making and things like this. And then this blade is an 1/8 inch by 16 or 17 teeth, I can't remember. But this is going to be more for really, really tight curves and cutting circles and all those kind of things. So you want to make sure you choose a good resaw blade, but you also want to make sure that your bandsaw can handle the size of blade. Like if you had a 14 inch 3/4 horse bandsaw, I would not put a 3/4 inch blade. I'd probably go with a 1/2 inch blade with like 4 TPI roughly. I'll link the blades that I use for both the table saw, this, and when we hand saw, along with some discount codes down in the pinned comment. But this is going to work good for mine. I have a 17 inch Grizzly. I think it's 2 horsepower. So this is going to be a great blade for me. We're going to set that up, and you got to remember bandsaw blades have a lot of set. So you're going to want to make sure you split the difference between your 2 teeth on your middle line, and then you're going to want to set it up on the fence. Let me show you how that works. Now you're going to want to bring your guides down as low as you can. You got to remember that a bandsaw blade wants to flex left to right, and so the closer your guides are to your board, the less chance that's happening. Now with this one, unfortunately, because of the size of this board, I can't come all the way down just above my board. I usually try and get an 1/8 above the board, but we're going to bring our fence into that center line there. And you're going to remember you're going to want to split the difference between your tooth set. Now, if you come around here, you can see where my guides are. They're just literally a hair's width behind the gullet. That's going to keep the blade as straight as possible. And I'm about a dollar bill's width away from my blade. Now, once you have your fence set up, you're going to want to set up your feather board, and you want to make sure you're behind your blade so that you're not pushing the cut portion of your board into the blade. And you're going to set that up. And then your push stick's going to be a little bit different. You're going to be pushing from the side and from behind. So what that allows you to do is keep it against the fence. Sometimes when you're resawing a tall board, the blade wants to go towards the fence. And so you kind of keep light pressure against the fence, and you're going to push from behind. Now, one thing to remember is when you get to the end of your board, you're going to be pushing, and then suddenly when it cuts through the board, there's going to be no resistance. So right before it gets to the end, you want to slow up your pressure a little bit, and remember, you're going to jerk forward a little bit. So you want to make sure that you have enough meat on your push stick, that you have good hold of your board, and that you're not pushing too hard, that as it releases, you're going to push right into the blade, and you sort of want to anticipate that sudden sort of release of pressure. So you want to kind of slow up at the end. Sometimes I'll reach behind and just at the very end, just sort of pull my board through so I don't risk kind of falling forward. Let's actually do it, and you can see exactly how I go about that. And as you can see here, we've got a perfectly resawn board, but you can see the disadvantage in a bandsaw is I'm not exactly quite the same width, but that's fine because you'd run this through the planer anyways. But that bandsaw is set up perfectly. I've got a really great video I told you should definitely watch that, or check out Alex Snodgrass. He's like the bandsaw wizard. He's got some new methods of setting up bandsaws that are different than the old school guys talked about. Let's over to the bench, and I'm going to show you how the Japanese use a Ryoba saw to resaw a board. Now, this is a really cool way that Japanese carpenters have been doing for hundreds of years. This was taught to me by a guy named Taeho Kwon, who's not Japanese, he's Korean, but he works at the William Ing School, and he is fantastic with a handsaw. Now this is a Ryoba saw. It has two sides. It has a rip side and a crosscut side. The rip side have bigger teeth. These are the Suizan folding ones we carry on our site, but there's lots of great saws out there. So the Japanese work in quadrants, and the reason is if you just tried to resaw this whole board, the chances of you kind of turning one way or the other are pretty high, and it's a lot of work to saw all the way through the board. But because of the way you cut with the Japanese saw, you do it in what they call triangles, where you're going to start here and work your way down like this, and then you're going to come to this side and start here and work your way down like this, and then you keep spinning the board until you've sort of cut your first 4 triangles from 4 sides, and then you're gonna finish it off through the middle. And because you can always see your line when you're doing that, you don't have to see what's going on the other side of the board when you're cutting down like this, you're gonna get a pretty accurate cut. And then once you get all 4 of those cut, you can just kind of cut right down the middle, and the other kerf from the outside that you already created is going to guide your saw. And then at the end, you know, if you were going all by hand, you would then finish it up with a hand plane and clean up that middle area, but it's gonna give you a really accurate result. So let me show you how I do it. Now here's a great little tip too. If you start to get off your line, depending on where that is. So if I'm off my line down here, I can put a little bit of pressure on my saw to go back the way I need to go. But it's the opposite on the top, because you need to think that it's the bending one way is gonna push it the other way on the top, sort of like a corkscrew. So if I'm off on this side, I'm not gonna bend towards it, I'm gonna bend actually away from it, and that's gonna push this side of the saw towards the viewer, the camera, that way. So that's a good little tip when you're using a Japanese handsaw. So I'm gonna continue, we'll speed through this so you don't have to try and watch me resaw a board, because I'll tell you, this ain't that quick. But we're gonna do our triangles, we'll get through, and then I'll check in with you when it's time to split the middle. So you can see, this is why this technique is so great. I'm just a teeny bit off my line in the center here, but that's okay, because we keep working on our board, and eventually that's only gonna be just a small fraction of it that is off. One good technique to think about is looking in the reflection of your saw. If it looks like an exact mirror image, your saw is square. If it looks warped at all, then your saw is not. In fact, I have a great video that you can go check out all about using Japanese saws. I'll link that again in the top right-hand corner. You can see my lines basically met up here. I'm like a 64th, if not a 1/28th off. And so we'll just keep moving our board around and keep taking our triangles till we get towards the middle. All right, as you can see, we got it. Anybody who's ever tried to resaw a board with a saw knows you're not gonna get it perfect. And the fact that we have 2, look at this, they're just about equal side. There's a high spot in this one, a little bit of a low spot in this one. Run that through the planer, good to go, or a hand plane, you'll be able to take that off and level these out. But the fact that these are so close to perfect, I mean, that's pretty incredible with a handsaw, especially over the course of a full 8/4 board. That was a workout, baby. All right, let's get back on the tripod and talk about what we learned. So I think in closing, I'm gonna call this 4 ways to resaw a board, because the table saw is a great way to start something like this. If you have a lower powered saw or maybe not the right blade, you can take a few small passes just to get you started so you know you have a straight line to eyeball and work off of. This way works fantastic. I mean, these are 2 equally sized boards with a handsaw. That's not something I was able to do before I learned this technique, so I'm pretty proud of that. You know, resawing is super important because it's great for grain match, or if you need a 1-inch thick board and you have an 8/4, who wants to run an inch through the planer? I mean, that's just a waste of wood. So resawing saves lumber, it allows grain match, because now these 2 match perfectly this way, they match perfectly this way, and so you can use them to create boxes that look like continuous grain all the way around the box. So it's a great technique. Guys, thanks for watching. Like I said, I'll link everything we talked about with some discount codes down below in the pinned comment in the description. If you want to support the channel, head over to the KM Tools store at kmtools.com. And as always, stay safe in the shop.